I'm Brian Shin. I'm the founder and CEO of Visible Measures. Extremely excited to be here today. Visible Measures is an online video measurement and analytics firm. And today we had an interesting announcement at IAB and was really honored to have a chance to be one of the morning keynotes.
Great.
So.
Tell me a little bit more about your announcement.
So Visible Measures really has become a leader in online video analytics and for major publishers, like pretty much all the big guys. From Microsoft to ESPN, MSN, and Yahoo, and Google, and the list kind of goes on and on. And we've been able to utilize this data for a long time to inform advertisers in terms of how they can do better on their campaigns. And so today we announced a system that actually was driven by our customers. So advertisers have been long asking us for a way for them to directly utilize the data that we have to have campaigns that essentially get their videos watched by people who are choosing to consume content online. And so we're extremely excited to be able to announce it. It's called viewable media. And viewable media, the whole theory behind it is that if audiences can choose whatever content they want to watch, they will always gravitate to the content that's of highest quality or most viewable. And so that's what viewable media is.
I see. I was going to ask you a little bit more about choice-based advertising and kind of what does it mean for advertisers if it's really up to the consumer. How does the advertiser know they're going to get the play they're expecting?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because when you talk to some of the biggest thought leaders in the industry, of which I'm like totally not one because I'm
yes, you are
not a thought leader, but if you think about really in all media, it's always been pretty much a broadcast type model. So whether it's radio or television, you're putting out an advertisement for people, and you're essentially building off of what they refer to as borrowed engagement. So if you're watching a TV show like The Hills or something that you might find interesting, the advertiser is kind of betting the fact that, hey, you're watching The Hills, I'd love to kind of piggyback some of that engagement and show you something. But what we're seeing is that there's a big trend towards consumer empowerment. So consumers being able to be in control of what media they watch, when and how, and on what device. And kind of really starting with the VCR, but now really going mainstream with the DVR. But now when you think about online video with things like with YouTube and Facebook, consumers can pretty much find whatever media they want whenever they want, and oftentimes it's referred to them by friends. And so we think this is one of the biggest trends that's ever happened in media, that consumers are no longer passive, lean-back consumers, are actually participants. And so what viewable media is basically predicated on is that consumers really are empowered to choose. And independent of what we're doing, we think that in the broader industry, choice is something that will affect all media going forward.
Great. That brings us to some of the questions. Part of the reason you were here today and what you spoke about this morning was defining the landscape of digital media, or digital video, I'm sorry. How is the definition of digital video different from what we get today from our set-top box?
Right.
Where's the line?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because in in television, in set-top boxes, et cetera, I mean, with connected TVs now, the line is really blurred, right? You've got essentially content that could be produced by an individual, content that could be produced by a small independent producer of web content, commingled with content that's produced by a major Hollywood studio. And so I really think that the line is driven by the behavior around how people consume the content. So I think increasingly we won't think about mobile video or like tablet video or tablet media and television media. It'll essentially be the mode of consumption. Is it someone who's watching longer form content versus shorter form content? Is it content that's been recommended by friends, or is it content that I've sought out? Or is it content that's been discovered in a more organic manner? And so I think that when you think about those experiences, they're all different, and they're actually all different depending on the form factor of the device. So if you're looking at a smaller device, like a handheld device of some sort, typically the content that you're consuming is something that was either directly sent to you or something that is of topical relevance in that moment. So you're seeking out something like, oh, we just talked about purses or something, and hey, there was this really cool purse. I saw an article that this purse costs like $5,000. I want to find that. So the behavioral experience is very different. Therefore, the content now is to the point where it can kind of shift to meet that behavior. And so that's really where we think the line is drawn, is based on behavior of the audience and the experience of the audience, as opposed to the more selfish viewpoint of the content producer.
With that line, not being drawn by the device or the platform itself, you know, I start thinking about Convergence, which is definitely still a little bit of holy grail territory.
Right, totally.
It does seem like, you know, we're getting closer, but I'm interested in sort of what are some of the why hasn't it happened yet? What are some of the inhibitors to scale?
Yeah, convergence is such an interesting topic, because when you think about it from the perspective of the advertiser and the publisher, it actually is a really positive thing, because you know, you could sort of, if you could kind of get everybody to do the same thing at the same time, like, you know, in the same way, it'd be great, because then you could just kind of hit everybody with the same message and it'd be awesome. I think one of the challenges is that consumers always sort of go counter to convergence. It's kind of like the second law of thermodynamics, like everything going toward entropy. Like, you know, people will fragment. People will, you know, they want to have, like, even if you have an iPhone and I have an iPhone, like, there'll be a whole class of people who don't want an iPhone just because everyone else has an iPhone, or, you know, and Android's growth is, you know, really becoming big, but there's so many Android devices, and, you know, so this kind of fragmentation is really the way that it's always been with consumers. And the challenge has always been with television and radio that consumers have really never had an easy way to essentially fragment the media. But the internet has kind of freed up the media, and now you're seeing, like, you know, fragmentation everywhere, and consumers contributing content as bloggers or as you know, video producers, et cetera. And so I think convergence is sort of an ideal scenario from the perspective of an advertiser or a publisher, but I think the advertisers and publishers that can embrace the fact that, you know, the consumer revolution is really happening, I think those are the guys who are going to be most successful. And, you know, you look at firms like YouTube and like ESPN and like Procter & Gamble and like Unilever and Ford and some other cutting-edge brands like Old Spice. You know, I think those are the brands who really embrace the fact that, like, hey, let's get consumers to want to participate and want to share and pass along our content for us.
One question that I'm going to be asking a lot of people who are sitting in your chair today is, what's something that's hot now in video that won't be hot a year from now? Kind of like a shiny object that will flicker out.
So as a independent measurement firm, we essentially measure all types of video advertising, and I think there could be a few of the what are perceived as novel advertising formats that may not really be super successful long term.
Like what?
So I think there's a lot of interest in sort of building more things on top of pre-roll. And so pre-roll advertising being essentially in-stream advertising that interrupts the content, but that's built on the more of a broadcast model where you're borrowing the engagement of someone who wants to watch a clip on CNN, or, you know, someone who wants to watch a show on one of these websites. In general, pre-roll, we're not saying that pre-roll is a bad thing or that borrowed engagement is bad. Certain brands will leverage it to get broad reach and you know, a little bit less targeted reach, but it still can be very useful. But I think there's been a lot of hype about essentially creating more interactivity on the pre-roll, more clickability on the pre-roll. I think that's probably more of a transitional step. We see that essentially the video itself being like the ad essentially becoming the content. Then you have the full shareability, the full embeddability of the same thing as you could have with any other piece of content, the full commentability, the full pass along ability. We think that that's really going to be the model going forward. So I think pre-roll will always exist, but I think the sort of what are perceived as the more interactive or advanced pre-roll type formats will probably be existing, but will probably never get massive scale, because to have massive scale you have to have some kind of agreement, and they're all kind of doing different things right now.
Great. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you.